Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Vabuk Pahari, and I'm from the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems. And today I'm going to be talking about DAOs and how DAOs govern, and specifically the different design choices that they make and their implications. Um, Now, we all love DeFi, and the reason that we love DeFi is because you can basically do a bunch of actions in a decentralized manner, and you can just place your trust in the smart contracts, right? And in a similar vein, DAOs were basically created as a way to basically own and govern DeFi protocols in a decentralized manner. The way that this works in practice is basically you have your nice DeFi application up on the left, then you have your governance contract, in the middle. I don't know why the thing isn't showing up. And then you have basically your DAO that basically controls the governance contract. And if you want to make any change to the DeFi application, you make it through the governance contract, right? And the DAO basically consists of like a group of token holders, and that's what a DAO is, right? And essentially, you might think like, okay, like all you need to do if you want to participate in governance in a DAO is just hold some tokens, but that's not actually true. All these rules of how DAO governance is actually done is actually placed in the smart contract. So for example, the DAO actually decides who they actually allow to participate in governance and who they don't. So for example, if you want to participate in some DAOs, you actually have to register your wallet address. You may need to put your tokens into a staking contract, right? And these governance decisions are actually written down in this governance contract in terms of codes, right? And now that many jurisdictions are actually starting to make laws on DAOs and stipulate what a DAO actually is, it's actually important to understand the different dimensions along which a DAO is made. So for example, this is a law from the Wisconsin DAO law, which actually states here that an algorithmically managed DAO may only form under this chapter if the underlying smart contracts are able to be updated, modified, and otherwise upgraded. Now, this really makes no sense because under this law, basically, like a Uniswap contract could be called a DAO because it can be updated, right? Like updated or modified by who? Does the judge have a key? What kind of powers does maybe they mean that law enforcement should have a key, right? But like, it's not clear what kind of power they want in the DAO, right? And so in order to make these decisions a lot clearer, what we did is like we actually analyzed the top 51 DAOs on Ethereum, and essentially we looked at the, sorry, I don't know why there should be text on top of the things, but I don't know why they're not showing up. So we analyzed the top 51 DAOs, we looked at all their smart contracts, their governance contracts, and basically their whole developer documentation in order to come up with the different dimensions and design choices along which a DAO makes their decisions, right? And so we came up with this nice big list, which I'm happy to talk about later on. But at a high level, basically a DAO is making two decisions, okay? So the first decision is actually who actually has the right to govern and who does not. So who actually has the right to vote and participate in the governance, right? The second part is actually what the process of governance is. So first, like that a proposal is created, then like that the voting actually takes place, then essentially that a proposal passes, and then that it executes, all right? And so let's look at the first thing. So who can actually participate in governance? So the first thing is actually owning governance tokens is not enough in order to participate in DAO governance, okay? So for the 39 DAOs actually required you to register in order to actually participate in governance. And this is kind of weird. Why actually require it? Well, it's basically gatekeeping. You don't want some people to actually participate in governance. Now, why not? Because that other person might be Binance, who don't actually own their own tokens, right? They actually tried to register to vote in Uniswap around 3 or 4 years ago, and there was such a large community outcry that they actually deregistered themselves, claimed it was a mistake, but we don't know. And so in terms of registration, there are two ways generally that this is done. Verified, but only 2 DAOs really do this. And then the most popular way is anonymous, okay? So in short, like with verified registration, what you have is basically you have a government ID, you have a wallet, and basically there's some centralized party that you actually call, and then essentially, you know, like the centralized party says you can participate in the DAO now, you can own tokens. Only 2 DAOs really use this. It's Nexus Mutual and Goldfinch. And it's not very popular because it immediately introduces this centrality, right? Second one is anonymous registration, where essentially you have somebody, they have a bunch of tokens in their wallet, and they basically just call a governance contract and just say, okay, I want to register to vote, all right? Now, the downside of this, of course, is that the same entity may have like 3 or 4 different wallets, right? Divide all their tokens across them and then say, I want to register. And this kind of gives you at least the thing, like, you know, it looks decentralized, but it really isn't. And the second part is, if this guy is malicious, you really don't know how large your malicious party is, right? The second way, the second dimension along which registration happens is like token holding versus token staking. So in token holding, essentially all you need to do is just hold tokens in your wallet and register, and you have the right to vote, right? So essentially, you can just buy it on like some sort of a public market, and you immediately get the right to vote. And this actually has led to a bunch of attacks, right? So someone just goes into a DEX immediately, buys a bunch of tokens, and basically creates a malicious proposal, right? On the other hand, with token staking, you actually send your tokens to a smart contract, and they're locked there at least for a certain time, right? So if you actually want to take it out, you actually have to, you can't do it immediately. You actually have to wait a certain time, right? And the idea here is actually, first, if you do something malicious, then you have some economic impact, right? Because your tokens that are locked in there lose value, so it makes attacking the DAO a little more impractical. The second part is actually, you actually need to be monetarily vested for some time in order to actually get the right to vote, right? And this is actually a big problem that we have in DAOs right now, is that you really have to decide, if you own some tokens, whether you actually want to vote with them or whether you want to exercise basically like the monetary value of your tokens, right? So you generally in DAOs, you can't actually put them in a DEX and get some value from your tokens and also have the right to vote. Most DAOs don't allow that. Most DAOs require you to just like keep holding on to it if you actually want to vote. If you sell it in any way, you lose completely your governance rights, right? And in this vein, we actually wanted to analyze like, you know, which one of these are winning. And if you actually look at how much tokens are owned by like custodians and like on-chain DEXs, basically like a large percentage of them are owned by them, and this is like a lower bound on basically just looking at like a few of the top CEXs. And actually for 44% of the DAOs, you have more tokens actually in the market than are actually registered to vote. Yeah, so it seems like people are way more interested in exercising their monetary right rather than keeping it to actually govern, right? Now that we've looked at, you know, who has the right to vote, let's look at how governance power is actually exercised. And so here, if we're looking at the life cycle of a proposal, right? So first, you have to actually initiate the proposal. Somebody says, hey, I have a great idea for a change. Let's do this. Then there's generally some sort of a voting delay to say, okay, let's talk about this. Then in the voting period, this is where the voting actually takes place. There's some things about like what kind of voting happens, like whether you have to vote for something or actually actively against something. Then there's the post-voting period. This is where the votes are counted essentially, and you know, based on the rules, they're certified. Yes, if it's passed, and no if it hasn't passed. And if it has passed, there's some sort of an execution delay, right? And then the proposal finally takes effect. It's executed on chain. And so between the time when a proposal is initiated to when it actually executes, somebody can also veto, right? That just means cancel the proposal. So for the purposes of time, I'm just gonna go into these two things, but happy to chat about everything later on. So with certification, right, like this is a pretty important thing. I would wager that like none of us knew before 2020 that the Vice President of the United States had to certify the election. So like these are things that you don't really realize how important they are in the smart contract until like something actually happens, right? And so the first type of certification is basically decentralize, right? So here anybody and people that aren't even in the DAO can just say, okay, this proposal has passed, right? And how do they do that? Well, they just call a function in the governance contract. The governance contract basically checks the rules, and then basically it says, okay, check mark, proposal passed, right? And realize here you don't actually need any sort of a trusted third party in order to certify it, right? The second one is centralized. Generally, this is done for DAOs with off-chain voting, but actually, this is also the model that many layer 2 DAOs have, like Arbitrum and Optimism, right? So there's a proposal that gets put off-chain, and basically it passes. The trusted third party sees it. They say, okay, it's passed, and then basically puts it on chain. Of course, there's the caveat that something might pass on chain, but this party might just decide not to actually execute it. In a lot of layer 2s, they actually have the power, the certification authority essentially has the power to just say that any proposal that they want to have passed has just passed, regardless of the voting outcomes, okay? And so in order to basically, get rid of this centrality in like this off-chain voting and stuff, there's another paradigm called optimistic certification that allows anybody to certify by putting down some collateral on-chain, right? So essentially here, I see something off-chain, I put down some collateral, I wait a couple of days. If nobody objects, then essentially it passes, I get back collateral back, right? Essentially now what happens if someone malicious puts it in, then basically within those 2 days, somebody challenges it, says this is the right proposal, and the decision generally is made by an impartial third party. Note here that actually you are giving up your DAO's autonomy by using this system, because at the end of the day, this impartial third party has the ability to actually make decisions on behalf of the DAO. It's not the DAO itself, right? And then, the winning one gets some cash back, and then the winning proposal is executed, right? So if we look at veto, right, essentially someone proposes a proposal, and, the proposal may have a bug in it, like it may be malicious, right? So you don't want these proposals to actually pass, so somebody somebody can come in and basically cancel it. And just to note that the veto is generally more important for DAOs with just on-chain voting, and like where the entire pipeline of the proposal is done on-chain, right? Why? Because everything is automated. So something that doesn't pass, something malicious that passes is actually executed on-chain, whereas for off-chain there's always this trusted third party, right? And the veto is actually something very necessary for any DAO to have. Like, why? Because this is what a proposal actually looks like, right? Like, you allow people to just propose with like a certain threshold, and nobody by just looking at it actually knows that there is a bug in it. This was a real proposal from ENS, where they found the bug after the proposal has actually been done, and everybody had to vote against it. If the proposal had actually passed, nobody could have stopped the execution of this buggy proposal. So the veto is actually something that's very much needed. Generally, the veto power is assigned to 2 people. So the first one is the vote initiator. So if I initiate a vote, I can cancel it myself, right? Like, of course, this can lead to something where, it's a proposal that's required in the DAO. I propose it, and then if I'm like a little malicious, like, or I don't like it, I can just cancel it and just make it longer for the proposal to actually execute later on. The second one is a specific veto authority. So basically here, right, a specific wallet address has the power to veto essentially any proposal, right? Like this is generally looked as a guardrail. So if there's something malicious or something, or a bug, then somebody can just come in and just cancel the proposal. But this has huge implications for the centralization and security of a DAO, especially if you look at this recent, well, not that recent, but 4 years ago, Venus Protocol, essentially a majority of their token holders voted on a proposal to basically take a lot of the DAO's treasury. And there was a vetoer that basically canceled it. And so this brings into question of, okay, like who, like centralizing of a DAO versus basically having guardrails against it. And essentially who, in essence, like controls the DAO. Yep. Yep. And so why are we doing this? Well, actually, this our characterization of all these DAOs actually brings in, allows us to study like what can go wrong in case of like attacks. We actually map out like the different security implications of each of the design choices that you make, right? So I'm just going to give you a quick example of basically Compound, which was exploited for like 25 million. In the end, the exploiter decided to cancel the proposal, but I'll just show you quickly how actually this happened. So essentially they exploited 3 critical vulnerabilities that we've gone through today. The first one is like anonymous registration. So as we looked at before, right, like nobody knew how large the party was because essentially they just had it divided across like 28 different wallets. Like, around the true size of the malicious party was 680,000, which is more than twice what their best estimate was. The second was voter apathy and vote sniping. So they do all their voting on-chain. On-chain voting has a cost. Essentially, people just thought the proposal would fail. And at the end of the day, like right before voting ended, basically 582K votes were cast, and essentially the vote passed. Just to note that like there are DAOs that have there are DAOs that actually have guardrails against this written into their smart contracts, essentially like Lido and Arbitrum. Essentially what they do is they only allow you to vote against a proposal on the last day, essentially making sure that such proposal don't pass. And the third one is a lack of oversight. There was no veto authority, and surprise, surprise, in response, that's what they did. They basically added a vetoer. I think it has to be elected every 6 months or something, but essentially that's what they did. So in conclusion, we classified DAOs along various security dimensions, and essentially we realized that every time that you have questions about like security or usability or efficiency of a DAO, like the direction that they lead to is essentially like centralization, right? Like take an example of delegation, right? Delegation sounds like a great idea, and it is a great idea because it increases the amount of votes that you actually cast, but it invariably actually centralizes the DAO because you're actually giving power to a smaller number of people, right? And so now the other thing that like our work really helps with is now you can actually answer some of these questions very well. So if you're like a lawmaker and you actually want to like create some sort of a DAO law, like you can actually make it clear like what exactly you want the power to do, right? Like who gets to update it, who gets to modify it, or if you want a veto power, maybe you want a certification power, right? Maybe the key should be with the judge, maybe some law enforcement, but I think it actually allows you to make these decisions as a lawmaker a lot more cleanly. Yep. Thank you very much for listening to me. Happy to take any questions.
outside. Yeah.
Yep.